I'm pretty stubborn, so I don't tend to compromise. But I think time is always there, running out, and for you would know this. Like you've got no light, and you're outside, so you have a scene that you've worked on, smithied over for 8 months in the script. Suddenly you've got 20 minutes to shoot it. So you'd say, okay, I had 5 setups. I've got to do it in 2. What are those 2?
What a pleasure to watch this film. I first saw it, I want to say, in 2014 when it came out. And I was so unsettled, I think, as we all were in the genre community and beyond. It was so scary. And now sitting here, I found myself so emotionally invested in Amelia and really feeling for Sam and seeing the kind of misunderstood sort of nature of it all. So it was found myself more profoundly moved.
Oh, wow.
And then I found myself cackling, like just, it's so darkly funny. And I'd love to just ask you about that sense of humor and bringing that to this film.
Well, I think you can't have any kind of film without some weird-ass humour somewhere in there. So I think it was just part of my personality to slip all that in. I think, there's even, I wouldn't call them jokes in Nightingale, but there is some levity as well, some funny moments there.
How do you, because you are such a visionary and your tone is so stunning and so specific, when you do get across the finish line, or at least to the point of production, which is that impossible place we all get to, right?
Yeah.
How do you bring your crew in? What is that communication like, where you bring them in and you say, this is the specificity, this is what it is?
Yeah.
How does that communication go?
Well, I have a recurring team, so I'm very loyal, and I like to use the same DOP and production designer, and where I can, costume. And then we are all very particular about the crew. So not that I control their choices, but I always meet their heads of, their kind of key people in their department. And we make sure, say, for example, with this, you have a 5-6-year-old child on set, there's got to be people who are sensitive and who have the right vibe. And then we go forth together. And then I find I don't know about you, Josh, but when I have something in my head, I assume that everyone's going to get it pretty quickly, and that's not always the case. So it's a matter of kind of funneling it through the same pathway, which is, something that I'm monitoring, and just being patient and saying, no, that's not quite right. And then eventually there's a flow, and I think then you're all on the same bus traveling together.
It is about constant guidance, but also I find myself constantly repeating myself. That's just part of what it is, right? That sort of over communication.
Yeah,
and
it's about respect. You got to respect all of the crew and the cast, but that you can't assume that they understand what's in your head and your heart. It has to be communicated.
I noticed for the first time, and maybe again it's this big, beautiful screen, that Amelia is reading The Artist's Way. I just my buddy
I
Charlie.
forgot.
Yeah.
I actually didn't even notice that when I watched it back recently.
It's the first time I noticed that detail, and I want to ask you about your process of writing this film. I believe you were in Amsterdam.
Yes.
In 2014 or 2013?
Yeah.
And this was grieving your father?
Yes,
is that right?
that's right.
And you talked about dreaming and grieving and writing. And I'd love to just,
Well, just on that Artist's Way, Jag, I actually did that when it came out a million years ago and started doing morning pages. And before that, I wasn't writing. Wow. I'd written as a kid, and then I started writing again, and that's what led me to script writing. So if you haven't done that book, go and do it. It's amazing. In terms of, what was the question?
Well, I was just going to ask you if you'd indulge us in sort of the process, process of when you were there for this film specifically, and you talked about in past interviews about the
That's
dreaming
right.
and about
Yeah.
the writing. Was it morning pages? What was your process of writing this piece in particular?
Yeah, I knew I'd written about 6 or 7 films before Babadook, and none of them were getting made. And it's kind of a similar position to what I'm in now, actually. But I thought, well, either I'm going to give this up or I'm going to go somewhere and do something totally different. So I applied for this place called Binger Film Lab, which no longer exists in Amsterdam, and I got in and on a treatment. So I had a treatment for the Babadook. And yeah, I was more interested in not so much grief, but the suppression of really tough feelings. Because I'm a feeler, and I've always been that, even though the rest of my family are very opposite. And so I was like this feeling center. And then I thought, wow, I really missed my dad, and I went through that. And I thought, what if I didn't? What if I couldn't feel this? What would happen? And then that's how the story started to kind of seep into my bones.
And just in terms of the discipline of that process, would you find yourself it pouring out of you in the morning, or like my wife talks about every time the sun starts to go down, she's like, why am I so drawn to the computer right now? Why is it this time? What was the time it did it vary? What was that? I don't know.
It varied. I'd probably spend about 6 hours procrastinating, and then 2 hours writing. And I'm a big believer in the procrastination actually being part of the dreaming that gets you to the page. I don't
Familiar? Yeah.
applaud. I
snaps.
enjoy applause. No, I think we spend so much time, beating ourselves up for not doing it. But for me, riding my bike around Amsterdam, listening to music, thinking about it was doing it. Talking to a friend about it or a colleague about it was doing it, and then getting to the page is obviously doing it. Amsterdam was very special, and unfortunately, Bing is no longer there, but it was incredibly special. I remember my script editor saying to me, I don't want to hear any shit about first act, second act, third act. I just want you to go and write, get it all down. And it was a really amazing time.
I had the pleasure of watching your short film Monster this morning. I don't know why I didn't think to watch it some years ago, but it was brought up. Has anyone seen it? It's so phenomenal. It's like better than anything I can imagine making, and that's just the short. The tone is just so wonderful. Of course, like Babadook.
The only thing I've shot on film. Yeah, I mean, we shot it black and white, Super 16, because I knew I'd probably never get to do it again.
It's so transportive, phenomenal. And was that era? Did the short come in that Amsterdam era, or was that?
No, that was like way before. I know that it's quite commonplace now for writers or writer directors to do like a proof of concept sort of short but I wasn't as calculated as that, so I didn't have this in my head at all. I actually just thought, I had a friend whose child was very, very difficult and was seeing this monster everywhere. So for those of you who haven't seen it, it's it contains the seed of this film in it. And so my friend just pretended to her son that the monster man was real. And then I thought, oh, well, maybe it was real. And so that's how the short came about.
Wow. Well, it's really wonderful. I recommend anybody just you check it out on YouTube. You talked about bringing your repeat crew or crew that you'd work with under the film. Were there crew members on Monster that were aboard Babadook?
No, because it was sort of 9 years later. So that we didn't have the opportunity to do that. But I worked on Dogville, which is this Lars von Trier film. And I saw Lars really taking his crew with him, and they'd worked together for 20 years. And there was this incredible shorthand that he had, and I thought, I really want to do that. And so, I've got another project coming up, looks like next year, and the first thing I do is get on the phone to Radek, my DOP, and Alex, my production designer, and get them involved, make sure they're available.
I know you can't talk about what your project is specifically that you have coming down the pipeline, but you've been quoted as saying, you can't make something that you're not connected to.
Yeah.
Which you can often tell when a filmmaker isn't connected to material. That it can be the gig thing, and there isn't kind of their heart in it. I'm curious, without obviously illuminating what the project is, I'm curious if you could illuminate or maybe hint at what you're excited or eager to express in that next project.
Yeah. Well, since my last project, I had a film fall over. I mention this because some of you, maybe all of you, are directors, but I had a film fall over 3 weeks before production in 2021, and it nearly killed me. Seriously, I couldn't get out of bed. I was a mess, like, for a long time. So after that, I went and wrote, and it's just been the weirdest time. It's been so hard to get things made. It's like, I'm very particular and very dedicated to what I want to do. So I've had, how about this script? How about this? And then I was thinking, this is so hard, And then a knock came from another creator who I love and admire, and he's asked me to do this thing, and it looks like it's going to happen. So sometimes there are these gifts that just come that you don't expect. And what I love about it's based on a book, an existing property, and I just love what it says. I love who it's for. I love what it says about life. So it's not an intellectual decision for me. It's just, I have to do this project, And I'm being sort of mysterious about it because I can't tell you what it is. But hopefully in about 2 weeks, we'll be able to announce it.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait. I think we're all ready. Yeah.
I just cannot wait to be directing again. I feel like being deprived of oxygen or something. So, it's exciting for me.
I absolutely loved The Murmuring, your Cabinet of Curiosities.
Thank you.
And I just thought it was just so gorgeous. And
it was amazing to work with Guillermo. And as I was saying to you, Josh, out there, he gave us all Final Cut. So I've done 3 for 3 with Final Cut, which is, almost unheard of. I really recommend it. It's one of the things I won't work without that, actually. Yeah.
You've earned it. I will struggle, but it's fine. It's just gonna keep buying Nikes.
Well, if your partners are good and you trust them, I think it's the next best thing. Mm-hmm. But, if you're in a position and suddenly someone comes in and takes your film from you, it's like having something murdered, in front of you. It's the most painful I can imagine. Mm. I mean, I've had a film fall over, so it's the most painful thing. And I don't think if you give someone the money to make a film, let them make that film. Yeah. I feel really passionate about that. Yeah. And I think directors are not respected enough to do what they do well.
I often forget that is part of our job. That is part of our role, right? And for all filmmakers out there, that you have to be, you have to really dig your heels in about your vision, and it will often pay off. But there is a dance that we don't often think that we're signing up for, right? That is a bit of diplomacy and is a bit of and
I think that's okay. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, people. Let them give you notes. Take the good notes. Like never turn down a good note. Take it, but just don't take on the bad ones.
Speaking of notes, I'm curious. Once you
got some notes for me?
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, on page, the way that he pops out, I can't. I want to go back to Babadook, this beautiful film. Once you did get it into production, I know there were some obstacles along the way. But once the film was in production and it did have a modest budget, I'm curious what the non-negotiables were. You said, even though we're shooting for this, modest amount of days, this short amount of days, even though we've got this, mild amount of money, this modest budget, this low budget, what were the non-negotiables going? We say, I will not sacrifice this sequence. The set has to be X, Y, and Z. I'm just curious when you think about that.
I wouldn't sacrifice performances. I would never say, if people say you've got time for 2 takes, I'll say, are you kidding me? I'll do it until this 5-year-old actually has a performance in the can. I'm not gonna, because it's up there forever. So, and it was he was a young child, so I wouldn't compromise on that. So we had 6 weeks. So we had, what's that? 6, 5, 30, 35 days. Yeah, and 30 days. Well, I can't add up tonight.
A month and change.
30 days. How many days?
A month and change.
Oh, no, 5 days a week. 30 days. Yeah. And I think we snuck in a few more days pickups.
Month and change.
Yeah, exactly. So I wouldn't compromise on the days. We had less crew in Australia. We're allowed to have less crew. We don't have to have 100 people on set doing nothing, or some people on set doing nothing. What else?
I ask you about a moment when you were on
camera.
set?
It was all in camera, so all the effects were in camera, and I wouldn't compromise on that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's such a visceral film, and I think that's a testament to it. You can really feel it.
Yeah, I feel
Everything's so tactile.
I feel the brain takes in effects differently when they're happening in front of the camera. I mean, of course we had, occasionally wires. I mean, Noah didn't magically reverse himself up the stairs. There were wires that were erased in post, but all of VFX was just smoothing and erasing. So
it's so impactful and stunning, and I love that, and it does change the viewer's experience.
I think
and
so.
I'm glad you fought for it. I'd like to ask in our home stretch here about pivoting. So when you were on set, if you can take us back to a moment when you were up against it, and you had to compromise, and a compromise that comes to mind, whether it paid off for a greater outcome in your mind or otherwise?
I mean, I'm pretty stubborn, so I don't tend to compromise. But I think time is always there, running out, and you would know this. Like you've got no light, and you're outside, so you have a scene that you've worked on, smithied over for 8 months in the script. Suddenly you've got 20 minutes to shoot it. So you'd say, okay, I had 5 setups. I've got to do it in 2. What are those 2? Things like that. I found it more difficult in the edit because I was an untested filmmaker and there were a lot of cooks. So in the fine cut, there were people saying things in the cut that we saw now, basically, but with no sound yet, saying I remember one Screen Australia person said, Essie Davis should be embarrassed to be in this film, and this is terrible, doesn't make sense, it's not scary, da da da. And I just went quietly and just stuck to my guns and didn't change anything.
Amen. I mean, thank you.
I
My
mean,
God.
I had the benefit of seeing 2 good friends. One is now a superb director and working a lot, who did the same, who took the notes but then didn't take them on board, who listened. And then I saw another director take every single note, and his film was a mess, and he hasn't worked since that film. So it's a hard lesson learned,
Yeah. You don't want to turn your vision into applesauce, but it's a
No.
hard lesson. Yeah. Well, in the words of Guillermo del Toro, and I only say this because I heard you quote him, you are the shit. This was such an absolute pleasure to watch
thank
this
you,
film
Josh.
with you and to be speaking with you. And thank you for signing my Babadook.
Thanks, Josh. It was wonderful.
A pleasure.
And
Thank you,
for
Film
coming
Independent.
and watching. It's a pleasure to be here. So.
Woo!
Thank you.